What's going on, everybody? It's Wayne. Welcome back to the Bigfoot Report. Tiffany and I have a few more that we would like to share with you. Today, we're going to be talking about the Bigfoot photo finish. Then, we're going to tell you about 3 boys and their camping trip. And then, Tiffany is going to finish it off with Bigfoot summer camp. These are 3 really, really cool encounters submitted to us, and we hope that you guys will continue to get those in. If you've had an encounter that you would like for Tiffany or myself to narrate, please send those to the Bigfoot Report podcast at gmail.com. Again, that's the Bigfoot Report podcast at gmail.com. We know you guys are ready. We're ready. So we're going to get started.
I am writing today to finally tell my story. Not really a story, though, seeing as how it really happened. I assumed that encounter would be a better word for it, or maybe sighting. I must add that I haven't ever had anything like this occur, and I haven't told anyone about it. This has been the bane of my existence since seeing whatever it is that I saw that day. To give some context, we'll start at the beginning. I am a wildlife photographer. I do this as a hobby and to experience all that nature has to offer. I have captured many wild animals and am used to traveling all over in order to get the perfect shot. It was wintertime in my hometown, and I found myself listless, driving some backcountry road. As I was driving, I noticed that the birds were flying in almost a zigzag-like pattern out in front of me. I found it to be very odd. Just then, and in an instant, a doe ran right out in front of my car. I almost hit her because I was so focused on the weird flight pattern of the birds. Nonetheless, she made it safely to the other side of the road and looked back at me as I sat there shaking with adrenaline. Why do deer do that? Anyway, she had a look about her, and I know this is strange, but I'm just telling you how it happened. But it was almost like she wanted me to follow her. Animals have that way about them. I've experienced it before many times in the woods. I decided it wouldn't hurt. The backdrop of the woods would make for a great photo with the sparse trees and snow on the ground. I pulled off to the side of the road and gathered my gear. I almost lost sight of her, but then caught the last glimpse of her tail flick before she went into the woodline ahead of me. I followed a little ways back. I wanted to take her picture in her truest form, simply a wild animal in nature. She had walked on ahead and stopped in a crowd of trees with a single stump standing alone in the middle. She started eating something on the stump, and I was able to catch the best shot of her. To back up just a hair, as I held my camera up and looked into the lens to take a picture as I hid in some brush, I saw just past her in the trees a large, dark shape. I didn't know what it was, and I figured it was just a smudge on the lens and proceeded to wipe it off. When I brought the camera back up, however, it was still there. I took the picture anyway, figuring it was just another larger stump. I made a slight foot adjustment before I took the next picture, and a loud crack echoed, scaring the doe away and ruining my chances at any more pictures. I had snapped a branch that lay just under my foot. That's when I noticed that she wasn't the only animal that moved. What I had previously thought to be a larger stump also moved. It didn't take off running as she had, though. I was instantly filled with dread and fear. I had brought my camo cover with me, and the only thing I knew to do was to lay down as fast and as flat and as quietly as I could and cover myself with it. Not the conventional use for that, but it was my best shot. whatever this thing was, turned around and started sniffing out the air, almost like a typical wild animal. But as many times as I had been out, I knew this wasn't your normal, run-of-the-mill wild animal. At least none I have ever experienced anyway. I lay there trembling, looking through the small sticks that surrounded my line of sight at this big, hulking creature. Why was the deer not afraid? Did she not notice it? Or just not care? Maybe she was used to it and didn't let it bother her. I had so many thoughts running through my head, but I didn't have time to process any of them. This beast stood up and kept standing up. I haven't ever seen anything as tall as this in the woods, that's for sure. I am a modest height of 6 foot to 6'1", but this thing had to have been every bit of bare minimum 7.5 to 8 feet tall. My mouth went dry then, and I found myself wishing he would sit back down in order to be a little less intimidating. I know he smelled me. He took a long, deep draw of air in his lungs through his nose. I am really surprised my movements, as well as the doe's, hadn't stirred it before. It was a chance photo opportunity with the doe, so I hadn't worried about spraying myself to neutralize my own scent like I normally would have done. He looked in my direction. I tried to lay as still as possible. The eyes searched for movement, and if he didn't already know where I was by smelling me, I didn't want him to see the quiver of the cover I had haphazardly laid over top of me. The only thing I could compare him to was a gorilla, but we had none of those in our woods. His face, though, wasn't quite like a gorilla, despite the other gorilla-like features. He was tall, super wide, had big hulking legs, long arms, and a wide torso as well. He had traps on him like a heavy weightlifter. No neck, but his face was almost human. He had ears like we do, I'm assuming. I didn't see any on the top of his head, but the hair on him was so long, you couldn't see them. That's when it dawned on me. He had hair, not fur. It was a dark brown to almost black color. I couldn't figure out what this was that I was looking at. His eyes were large, nose flat, and he had a wide, thin lip. I felt like I was so close to him. I'm not great at distances, but to tell those features, I was too close for comfort, in my opinion. I wanted so badly to take a picture, but I knew moving to aim my camera would be an instant giveaway, and I would have been dog food. I watched him, almost afraid to breathe and definitely afraid to move. He sniffed the air a few more times and turned away from me and started walking in the opposite direction. I laid there until just before dark before I felt comfortable enough to move. I hadn't heard any other sound, so I gathered my things as quickly as possible and ran as fast as I could to my car. I thought about that chance encounter for a long time. I thought about giving up my wildlife photography hobby, seeing as how I really lucked out that day and how I didn't ever want to see another one of those things again. But I love what I do, and that just wasn't an option no matter how afraid I was. Every time afterwards, though, that I went into the woods, I always looked for this creature, hoping to not find it. I have a 100% success rate in that, as I haven't seen anything like it since that day. I overheard the chatter in my town about possible Bigfoot sightings, but dismissed them thinking there wasn't a creature like that, or I would have seen them by now with how often I am in the woods. I guess that's what this was, and wishing that I had listened to those stories more closely now. That's when I got curious about this and what I had encountered, and I ran across and started listening to your podcast. I like your style and how you listen to people. You're not judgmental and you pay attention. I felt more comfortable sending this encounter to you knowing that it wouldn't be scoffed at. That's why I haven't bothered telling anyone else. I knew they wouldn't believe me anyway. I know this encounter isn't too long or way out there, but it is mine nonetheless.
For an all too brief period of time, my friends and I lived a lot like every kid in a Spielberg movie. We were feral Gen X kids in ye old early 80s. I lived in Harford County, Maryland, and on a Friday in early summer, two friends and I decided to head to the Winters Run River where we swam constantly in the summertime. We knew it very well. We decided to camp and took our Coleman 4-person tent and blankets and such. We didn't have much in the way of gear, but when you're young, it doesn't matter. Jimmy was oldest, there was Will and me. At the time, there was a large, to me anyway, farm ending at the river and then ending in a cliff that we jumped from to swim. Crossing the trestle would take you to the wooded side with a much better bank on the river, suitable for a tent, which is exactly what we put up. We lit a fire on the bank and just swam and did kid stuff. No devil's lettuce or booze. We were just being dudes. At some point, I really don't remember how things happened. The sun was going down and we were hungry, having eaten whatever we brought. We had a few dollars and decided to walk back along the tracks to a convenience store to get a couple boxes of Little Debbie snack cakes or something. Anyone else remember the box of oatmeal pie cookies for 99 cents? With our feral kid provisions, we started walking back. The sun had gone down considerably, and because the tent was against the woods on a low bank with the cliff on the other side, it was pretty shadowed. What I remember is that we were about halfway across the trestle. I felt Jimmy's entire arm hit my chest, forcing me to stop. I was on the right, Jimmy in the center, and Will to his left. And when I looked at Jimmy to get the WTF out, he made a shh motion with his hands and pointed down at the tent. We were high up, but whatever it was walking around the fire slowly. It was big. Not just big, but very big and bipedal. I could see the top of the tent below its hips as it moved around. I stared at it. I think we were quiet. Time froze, so I really don't remember if we watched it for 10 minutes or 45 seconds, but it seemed like forever. We watched as it explored, but it never made any attempt to get into the tent and seemed kind of obsessed with the fire. Fear eventually took over, and we ran asses and elbows to Jimmy's place, where the adrenaline rush finally able to fade away. All we could do is talk about what we saw. We went out the next morning, all around the tent in mud, sand, rocks, or whatever it was. Obvious something big had been moving. Very large depressions were visible. And as you might guess, the stuff we left was unmolested and exactly as we left it. Adult me would have gone into the woods. Young me gave that idea a solid hell no. We quickly packed the stuff up and got it home. We never crossed the trestle again. We did go swimming though, and the summers went on as they do, but we never went into the woods ever and never left the group. It's not a great story, and I've never told it publicly before. It is something that makes me watch shows and read from time to time. Like others here will probably tell you, once you see something like that, you take those images and memories with you everywhere you go. It's haunting.
I was 15 years old when this happened to me. Summer camp was always a special time for me. It was my own personal vacation I got to go to get away from my everyday life. I know, I was 15. What did I have to worry about? I had no adult responsibilities. I didn't answer to a boss, and I didn't have any bills to pay. Why would I want to escape that? Well, it wasn't that I was trying to leave behind. It was my parents. Now, don't get me wrong, my parents were great. I never suffered any abuse. But they both worked stressful jobs and never got to see each other. When they did, their discussions always turned animated, and then they turned into even louder disagreements with each other. I would always just head to my room when they both happened to be home at the same time and put in my headphones to drown out the noise. I often wondered why they didn't just get a divorce. It seemed they never agreed on anything, especially me. Decisions would be made about what I was and wasn't allowed to do, and they always contradicted the other. I looked forward to my sleepaway camp. I got to hang out with my friends, stay out on the lake as long as we could, and just be one with nature. I always felt that's where I belonged anyway, and was anticipating my 18th birthday more and more so I could make that my life. The day was warm when they dropped me off. I ran and met up with my friends, and we went to the main hall as we always did to hear from our main camp leader about what activities we would be doing and to introduce our camp counselors. The rules were always the same, so we really never paid much attention. I was excited to learn, however, that one of our new camp counselors would be taking us into the woods to have dinner around the fire and sleep in tents instead of always staying in the cabin we were assigned to. My best friend Jeremy and I always got to bunk together, and the tent assigned the night of the camp was no different. We silently celebrated and gathered our things to take to our respective cabins. The day of the camp out was long and hot. We did many activities and counted down the hours until dusk. The counselor loudly blew his whistle as the sun began to sink lower into the sky and the temperature began to drop. We all gathered up in a large bunch with the other campers to hear what was coming next. Finally, instructions for the campout was given. Don't wander too far away from the camp's fire circle. Don't do anything to destroy the property. And don't use the woods as your personal bathroom. Use the outdoor bathrooms instead. We all excitedly ran to our cabins and grabbed what we would need. We met back up with the counselor and all the other kids to head into the woods. It was amazing, and the air in the woods seemed different than the air back at the cabins. It smelled like home, freedom. As we walked, Jeremy found a large spider's web in a tree and pretended he was going to grab the spider that waited for its next meal and throw it on me. I shoved him hard, and we walked on. The sun sank lower and lower, and we finally made it to the pre-made fire circle, which was half a mile to a mile into the woods. We all set up our tents as the counselor started the fire and laid out things for dinner and s'mores for dessert. The stars were bright that night against the deep purple color of the sky. The fire crackled, and we ate heartily and then began making our s'mores. Time for scary stories, because who doesn't tell frightening tales around a fire in the dark? I was silently laughing to myself as the girls there all gasped at the stories that were told. As I listened to the counselor tell one of his made-up ghost stories, I heard footsteps fall behind us. I dismissed it and chalked it up to being in the woods, and smaller animals would be walking around. All the while, though, noting how heavy the footsteps actually were. That wasn't one of your typical raccoon footsteps. These were large. I got Jeremy's attention and motioned for him to listen for the steps being taken. In typical fashion, he lightly shoved my shoulder, believing I was only trying to scare him. but that wasn't the case at all. Before we all turned in for the night, I asked to go to the bathroom. The counselor said I could, but that we were all on the buddy system, and I had to take Jeremy with me along with our flashlights. Jeremy ribbed me all the way there, saying that he would hold my hand and keep me safe. Jerk. Nonetheless, we walked to the porta potty. As I was finishing up and cleaning my hands, Jeremy started pounding on the side of the porta potty. Jeez, man, hold on, I'm almost finished, I yelled. You probably shouldn't have had that third chili dog. Jeremy continued to bang on the side. Perturbed, I opened the door, and that's when I saw that Jeremy's face was as pale as the moon that glowed in the sky. He was looking into the woods, and he was shaking. Jeremy was never the type who showed fear to anything. But seeing him like this made the hair on the back of my neck stand straight up. I grabbed his shoulders, trying to snap him out of it and find out what was wrong. There. Big, tall bear, he finally mustered out. His flashlight was pointed at a tree a little ways away from us. That's when I saw it. Briefly, it would move just enough to where we could see the tufts of hair from around the tree. But then, it would jerk back around until it wasn't visible anymore. I stood there confused because that didn't really seem like bear behavior. Never in nature had I heard any bear accounts where they would play peekaboo around a tree. We both stood staring at this tree. After a few minutes of not seeing anything, we both decided to quickly make our way back, being sure not to run. The group was still around the fire when we got back. The counselor sensed something was wrong because we weren't our jovial selves as we had been, but he refrained from saying anything. He just stared at us. Before going into the tent for the night, he pulled us off to the side and asked what was wrong and what had happened. He was a nice guy, and I didn't want to ruin his first campout as a counselor. Jeremy and I came up with this BS story on a whim of how we had scared each other as we walked. Once he was appeased, we hustled into the tent and quickly zipped the door closed. We felt as safe then as we could, enclosed in a vinyl tent. We talked and made a plan for just in case we heard anything else. We agreed that we weren't going to keep both flashlights on. I would keep mine on, and we would save the battery in his and keep it off. I had never felt more uneasy in the woods. The sounds around us weren't too foreign, typical crickets chirping, but all the while, having just experienced what we did, it was now unnerving. We lay there in silence forever, it seemed, not talking, only listening to the sounds around us. Finally, we drifted off to sleep. But it was a sleep that would be short-lived as I was awoken by the heavy footfalls again. I listened intently to tell the direction they were coming from. To my horror, they were coming from the same direction as that porta potty. To keep from being filled with fear again, I told myself it was just the counselor coming back from using the bathroom and to chill out. I tend to overthink everything, and I felt that instance was not any different. I waited to hear the zipper of his tent closed, but it never did, and I still heard the footsteps. I shook Jeremy awake and told him what happened. Obviously irritated that I had woken him up, he told me to put my headphones in and go back to sleep. The quicker we go to sleep, the quicker morning will come and we can leave, he said. The counselor's tent isn't too far from ours, and I'm sure if it was something he thought was threatening, he'd come out and look around. I took his words, those spewed out in fear and frustration, as comforting. He was probably right anyway, and this was just my overthinking. I put my headphones in and turned on the music, drowning out every sound around us. The cricket's chirping ceased, and I finally felt myself drifting off again. I don't know how long I had been asleep, but I was violently awoken by Jeremy. "It's outside our tent. There is something outside our tent," he said. His eyes were wide as saucers. I quickly woke up and jerked my headphones out of my ears and listened. You could hear it by the fire ring. The food. The smell must have brought it in. We both thought bear, but bears don't always walk on 2 feet. They primarily walk on all 4s, but this was clearly something heavy and on 2 feet. We heard it gruff and snort as it picked up what could only be an empty chip bag and smelled it. It crumpled the bag and tossed it. Whatever this was walked closer to our tent, and in the shadow of this beast, bounced off the side of our tent. This was no bear, and we knew we were in deep crap. Why wasn't the counselor coming out? Didn't he hear this? How could he and the other campers sleep through this? It's not like it was being quiet. Then it occurred to me that maybe they were awake and were hearing this, just too afraid to come out or to say anything. "What do we do?" Jeremy whispered as he looked around the sides of the tent. I had no idea. I didn't know what to do in this instant. We didn't have any weapons. We were only 15. We didn't even have any bear spray. Even though we knew this wasn't a bear, the bear spray may have worked. We just sat there in silence, listening to this thing walk around. Finally, it found the trash can. It haphazardly threw the plastic lid off and onto the ground. It made a loud thud, and at that time, I knew that if the counselor and other campers weren't awake before, they were then. Made my way to the door of the tent, and Jeremy grabbed my shirt. "What in the hell are you doing?" he asked angrily. I said nothing, but slightly and silently as I could, I had begun to slowly unzip my tent. My mind screamed at me, asking the same question Jeremy just had. I was scared, but I was also curious. One of my downfalls, and one of the many things my parents argued about. Curiosity kills the cat. It echoed through my mind, but I had to know. My heart was in my throat as I continued unzipping the tent. I wasn't going to open it all the way, of course. I was just curious, not stupid. But I just wanted to see what this was. I quickly regretted this decision. A large, tall, hulking creature bent over the trash can, rummaging through the leftovers from dinner and s'mores. It threw out the empty bag of marshmallows, empty box of graham crackers, and then the empty bag of hot dog buns. It remained, still searching until it reached the bottom of the can and finally found the half-eaten hot dogs and chili. I watched it as it scooped it up and put it into its mouth. The hands on this thing were as big as baseball gloves. I couldn't see too much, but what I did see was more than enough to ensure I would be haunted by this night for the rest of my life. I looked around, and that's when I saw the counselor had done the same thing I did. He had unzipped his tent a little more than I, and I could see a fourth of his face peeking out. "Yep, we're screwed," I whispered to Jeremy. "The counselor isn't doing anything but looking through his tent's zipper, too." "What is it?" Jeremy asked, curious but too afraid to move. I didn't know what to tell him because I didn't know what I was looking at. I hadn't heard of Bigfoot before this. Just as soon as this beast made it into camp, it left just the same, walking in the direction of the creek. The ground shook as it walked away, luckily only leaving a mess of trash behind. I zipped the tent, and Jeremy and I stayed awake for the rest of the night. I was sure the camp counselor did the same. I did hate it for him. It was his first camp out in the woods with us, and now, just like me, would be traumatized and afraid to do this again. As soon as the sun broke the horizon, we all cautiously came out of the tents and looked around. The counselor picked up the trash and put it back and closed the lid without saying a word. We all helped him clean up the camp area and pack up to go. Jeremy and I talked quietly amongst ourselves on the way back about what happened. The girls seemed quiet as well, which was odd. We wondered if they had heard or seen this thing, but dismissed it because had they seen that, they would have screamed and we all probably would have died. Later that night, the counselor pulled us to the side before bed and confided in us what he had seen. He apparently saw me peeking out of our tent as well. We agreed we were going to keep this to ourselves. I thought that would be the best option also. No one would believe us anyway, and it would chalk us up to having an overactive imagination, and the counselor would probably lose his job. Jeremy and I had grown closer that summer, and we formed a good relationship with the camp counselor as well. No one spoke of that night after we all parted ways. Fast forward to today, and I'm now 22. I became a park ranger after graduating, and am always on high alert when in the woods. I became more knowledgeable in everything that's in the woods, and what isn't there, that's not supposed to exist. I took that sleepaway camp as a learning experience, and I've carried that with me. Jeremy and I are still best friends, and he, too, is a park ranger.